So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're actually going to be continuing what we had started out with, which is the different hadith that relate to, we call them the pearls of the Prophet ﷺ. And a couple, guess a couple weeks ago, we actually talked about, let's look into the different things. We talked about, let's zoom out a little bit, and we talked about a number of different things. Let's see what we talked about. We talked about the different obstacles to faith, and we talked about al-ghulu, we talked about extremism, we talked about following desires, doubts, temptations, ignorance in the religion. We talked about connecting and relating with the people that are distant away from the deen. But it was very important to talk about other topics. So if we're supposed to be distancing ourselves away from the people that keep us away from the deen, well, what and how? Oh, very, very, very low. Okay, well, that's not good news. Okay, is this better? Is this better at all?
Yeah, excellent, mashallah.
Excellent. Okay. So if we're supposed to be distancing ourselves away from those that keep us away from the deen, well, what is the alternative? So speaking about the alternative, that's why it was important to talk about the importance of brotherhood. Let's look into those hadith that relate to brotherhood, that relate to making a new circle of relations. Let's look into those hadith, one hadith at a time, and hopefully, inshallah, we can get to learning what makes that relationship. Let's see. The first hadith, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. The Prophet ﷺ, you could see this hadith is actually narrated in al-Bukhari and Muslim, that none of you would believe until they would love for their Muslim brother what they would love for themselves. Now, when you look at the key words here, you're looking at the word al-hub, love. But this wasn't the only hadith that spoke about love, because you could see that there are numerous hadith that focused on the word love and mentioned that when we're speaking about love, we're speaking about a relationship, we're speaking about building some sort of a centricity. What is a centricity? We're looking at changing the centricity from you being the center to the principle itself being the center. Now, this is key. The principle itself being the center, what does that even mean? That takes us to the second hadith. Let's look at this hadith. So if this one is saying you would not be a believer unless you would love for your Muslim brother or sister what you would love for yourself, well, that would actually tell us that there is another type and another level of love, because it's not just taking you to taking a different center, which is not you being the center, but it's actually that other area being the center. It's the principle. That's why you look at this hadith, لا تدخلوا الجنة حتى تؤمنوا ولا تؤمنوا حتى تحابوا أولا أدلكم على شيء إذا فعلتموه تحاببتم أفشوا السلام بينكم. Let's look at this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ in this hadith said, you would not enter Jannah until you believe. In other words, the center was that you had to have a vision that clarifies who you are, what you are, the purpose of your life, where you're headed, and therefore you would not make yourself be the center of all things. but you would recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center. And that's why that hadith was emphasizing you would not enter Jannah until you believe. Well, what is faith? Faith is regarding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center of all things. He's the creator. He's the founder. He's the purpose that we turn to. He's the one that determines the purpose. He's the one that determines the principle. وَلَا تُؤْمِنُوا حَتَّى تَحَابُّوا. And you would not be believers until you would love one another. What does it mean to love? I want you to look at this one because when you compare these 2 points, you talk about حَتَّى تُؤْمِنُوا and then you talk about حَتَّى تَحَابُّوا. I want you to look at the words because when you see the word تُؤْمِنُوا, you're talking about faith. But then it's telling you that لَا تُؤْمِنُوا حَتَّى تَحَابُّوا. You would not be believers unless you would have some love. How is love related to faith? Because when you love something, you adore it that you are willing to sacrifice yourself to whatever you believe in. It becomes, when you look at romance, let's do it this way. When you look at romance, what is it that is making love be that feeling at its strongest? It's usually when the person is distant. It's usually when you recognize that you cannot live without this person. That's what really lets love become a strong feeling that you want to be near the person. You want to be close. So when you look at وَلَا تُؤْمِنُوا حَتَّى تَحَابُّوا, and you would not be believers until you become lovers. This isn't talking about becoming lovers and in this type of romantic relationship, but this is actually talking about that you are willing to sacrifice, you being the center, to letting the principle be the center. Well, what is the principle? The principle is al-Iman. The principle is faith. The principle is that the reason why I am connected to you, the reason why I love that person is not because we have our commonalities in probably making jokes together, entertainment, and just sharing a certain space together, but this is supposed to be the spaces that we share together are the spaces that are probably a masjid, probably a halaqah, probably memorizing Quran, probably going for the same durus, which is actually connected with another hadith. The other hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, سَبَعَةٌ يَظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ. 7 that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would shade when there's no shade but His shade. And He mentioned among those, رَجُلَانِ تَحَابَّا فِي اللَّهِ. 2 men or 2 women, they loved each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what does it mean that they loved each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In other words, the bond, think of it as the main thing that connected these people together. It wasn't a common interest in a dunya interest, but it was a common interest for the akhirah. And that's why He said, وَلَا تُؤْمِنُوا حَتَّى تَحَابُّوا. You would not be lovers until you would really embrace faith. You would not embrace the faith unless you really recognize what it means to love one another, what it means to not make yourself as the center, but make the principle as the center, make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the center. And the hadith continues, أَوَلَا أَدُلُّكُمْ عَلَى شَيْءٍ إِذَا فَعَلْتُمُوهُ تَحَابَبْتُمْ أَفْشُوا السَّلَامَ بَيْنَكُمْ. Should I not show you off onto something that if you were to do, it would embrace or it would enhance the love between you. And he said, Afshu salam. What is al-ifsha? Whenever you would have a word in Lugha Arabiya that has the letter sheen in it, that actually is indicating that there's something that is being spread. It's called harfu tafashi. Harfu tafashi actually means that something is, when you say shh, you just feel that the letter sheen is spreading out there, and you just feel that that's why they call it, it's like the white noise. It's just coming in as spreading noise, and it just overcomes everything. It overcomes everything. That's why it's called iktafashi. It's kind of like white noise. But of course, the word white noise more has a lexicon that it's a noise that is, I guess, annoying, that's trying to silence everything and trying to overcome everything. But we're not talking about that type of a connotation. I'm actually talking about here that it's something that is spreading and that it goes and permeates in everything. So, afshu salama baynakum, the word as-salam actually means peace. So you're looking at afshu, spread peace amongst you. When you look at the word baynakum, he didn't say fikum. What's the difference? When you say fikum, it's like going into you, but bainakum, amongst you. Il-bain it's relating that it's something that connects you all. It's what brings the bond together. It's afshu salama bainakum. What is the salam? Is this talking about salam in terms of the relationship and talking about social justice, or is this talking about spreading peace and spreading a relationship and saying assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah? This can be one of the interpretations. Afshu salam to mean say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and it could also mean something rather more comprehensive. Afshu salam, spread social justice, spread peace, live the principle amongst yourselves, rather than you being the center, to actually letting other people recognize that you're also including their interest as well, and you're not living to consider only your interest, but you're considering other people's interests as also the main principle, and which is really the golden rule. That's why the Prophet ﷺ had actually mentioned in another hadith that you would not be believers until you would love for your Muslim brother what you would love for yourself. In other words, you really transmit and you change from you being the center to the principle being the center to other people's interest also being considered by you as an important center, and that's how you would see that other people will embrace you as well. Let's look into this hadith. إذا أحب الرجل أخاه فليخبره أنه يحبه. This one is rather interesting. If a man loves a Muslim brother, let them tell them or let them express themselves to them that they like him, which is really rather interesting because usually men don't express their feelings, especially men. And especially in Arabic culture, let's say it that way, expressing feelings is a sign of weakness, is a sign that you are right there exposing yourself too much, and then they would consider it as somewhat of you are being too transparent, and therefore you're not being solid enough. And you could see that the Prophet ﷺ was teaching Arabic culture in teaching men that expressing feelings is a way to help enhance such bonds. So you could see in a society where the man had seen the Prophet ﷺ give a kiss to his grandchildren, and he was really surprised. Well, he said, I have my own children, I would never kiss them. But the Prophet ﷺ responded, what can I do for you if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken mercy out of your heart? Now, looking at that, you could see that the Prophet ﷺ was teaching them that expressing feelings is not necessarily a sign of weakness, but is actually what makes strength. The Prophet ﷺ was redefining how they would bring that bond, how they would create a communication with one another. And part of the communication is communicating feelings. Now, it's more common in women to communicate feelings, but it's very rare, like we said, that men would communicate it, but it's important to teach your children how to communicate their own feelings, because sometimes when you communicate feelings, it lets others know what's making you not comfortable, what's making you comfortable, what is it that you're looking for, what rather than waiting for others to search what exactly are you really intending and what exactly are you looking for. And that's one thing I would say, ladies, many times I would say men don't understand exactly what you're trying to get. So I would say learn how to express exactly what you want and get to the point, because if you think that, no, I want him to understand it on his own, I would say, ladies, they just don't know how to do it. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was even saying, well, let them, or let the person express it directly rather than wait for the other person to somehow interpret what you're trying to say. Let's go for the other hadith. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من ولده ووالده والناس أجمعين. This one is, I guess, coming in with the same direction. You would not be believers until I would become favored, and in other words, their place of love more than their own children, more than their own parents, and more than all the people and other people. Well, why? Why is that the case, that we're supposed to be loving the Prophet ﷺ? Because what the Prophet ﷺ represents is not only of his own self. The Prophet ﷺ is representing the message. The Prophet ﷺ is representing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what he had sent with the Prophet ﷺ. In other words, he presents and he demonstrates the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when the person is loving the Prophet ﷺ, what comes with love is wanting to mimic the person. Whenever you would love anybody, you would want to mimic them. You would want to be around them. You would want to trace their history, and every single piece of information you would probably have or probably want to look for becomes to you as the area that is most concerning to you. Having that being said, when a person is a true believer, they would look for tracing the seerah, looking for the words, what the Prophet ﷺ had said, tracing even his looks, the behavior, everything that is about the Prophet ﷺ becomes their area of focus, their area of love, because to them, they recognize that that demonstrates Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's message, that demonstrates the legacy of all prophets, and that takes us to the purpose that preceded our existence. Let's continue with the other thing, but actually, let's look at this one a little, furthermore. حتى أكون أحب إليه من ولده. Notice he said الولد before الوالد. What's the difference? الولد is the child himself. In other words, your offspring. الوالد is your parent. Do we love our children more than our parents? Of course, it is part of our instinct that we would be fearful over our children more than over our parents. And one reason for that is because, of course, we had seen our children in their most vulnerable moments, but when our parents grow older, and throughout our life, we had always seen our parents as a place of power, as a place of authority. We can't imagine our parents changing positions from the place of authority to right now depending on me for their love, depending on me for their power, depending on me for providing for them. It just seems that it doesn't fit what we had always lived with, that idea of what our parents really hold. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us always when it came to الوصية that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decree that you would only worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and with the parents that He had decreed that they would get your ihsan? What is al-ihsan? Al-ihsan is a general term that you would give without waiting for something in return, because you recognize that they had already provided for you. They had already given the best of what they can provide for you. Now it is time for you to give in return, and not necessarily wait that, oh, well, what are they going to give me in return? They are right now too old to give you in return, because they had already invested before you had invested. What you're investing in helping your parents is really something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will get you, your own children, to see the amount of good, the giving that you are right now providing for your parents. So when you look at أحب إليه من ولده, what is the love to our children looking like? The love to our children is looking like that we would consider, of course, their needs before our needs. Our love for our children would mean that we would consider that we have to be there when they need us. We would consider that whatever makes them happy, we would usually have it as our instinct that we want to provide for our children whatever that makes them happy. It's part of our instinct, especially motherly instinct. Motherly instinct is more towards providing, giving, love, mercy. Fatherly instinct is more structure, making things at a long term be the area that would service them. Motherly instinct is, let's call it instant provision. Fatherly instinct is, no, I'm not going to give you the provision now. I'm going to teach you how to make this be a tool you're capable of getting the provision of it down the road, maybe 20 years from now, 15 years from now. So I'm going to let you learn how to work hard to get it, because it's not going to be available for you. Neither am I going to be available for you always. And that's why mothers, I would say, when perhaps the father wants to probably say, no, I'm not going to pay my child's college tuitions Sometimes it's actually needed to let the child himself recognize that they have to work towards getting the provision, and that their father and mother are not the ones that are supposed to be they're supposed to be the instant providers, because he cannot be a man if I'm going to be always providing for them, because they won't really feel it. Now, when you look at this love, how is this relating to all of that? That you could see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the Prophet ﷺ, look at this one. When the Prophet ﷺ, along with the Sahaba, he was in a battle, the battle finishes, but then something rather extraordinary happens. A woman is looking for her child, and it was a child that was still an infant. The mother is looking and taking every single child that she could see, and then you could see that she's concerned, but she couldn't find her child until later on, picking up every single child. And then when she recognizes it's not her baby, puts him down until finally she found her baby. The Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba looking at this, the Prophet ﷺ says, do you see this woman that is looking for her child and right now finding her child finally, and just shedding her tears on the child while she's nursing her own baby? Do you think she would throw her son in the fire? And they said, by Allah, she would not. And he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more merciful on his servants than this woman on her child. I want you to put that within perspective here. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more merciful. In other words, he gives us this instant love, and that's why we would make always the dhikr, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, the most merciful and most beneficent. Scholars actually said Ar-Rahman is more specific for the believers, and the Rahim is more comprehensive because it would include the mercy for the believers and the non-believers and every single servant on earth. So even if this person is not a believer, he might make a dua, Ya Allah, or God, or probably his version of who God is, and make the dua, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would answer his dua, that probably to cure his son or daughter, whatever, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would answer the dua. Even though, did he really make the dua for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or was he making the dua for maybe Buddha or Jesus Christ or whatever it is? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would still answer their dua. Even though on the inside, they would be making the dua for God. But certainly they would be mentioning a different name. That's the shirk in it. But they would be making a dua for God. And that's how that word, Ar-Rahim, is comprehensive to include the believers and the disbelievers. But Ar-Rahman is to be specific for the believers. Now, when you look at that area for how fatherly and motherly love come into being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more comprehensive in his love than the motherly love and the fatherly love. The motherly love that is instant, and the fatherly love that is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the Prophet ﷺ, sorry, in the Hadith, he had mentioned that in Allah إِذَا أَحَبَّ الْمُؤْمِنِ ابْتَلَاهُ. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a believer, he put them under struggle. Why would you put them under struggle? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would close the doors on you and keep only one door, which is the door that takes you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He would close the door perhaps of your rizq, maybe make you lose a job. maybe make you lose a parent, maybe make you lose your school, or maybe make you lose the different privileges out there and only leave one door open, which is that you would say, Ya Allah, which is what you would say, Ya Allah. SubhanAllah, I was watching some of those reports and some of those, of course, on the prisons in Syria and what people were writing on the walls. And many times you could see what they were writing on the walls. One of the things that was written on the wall is one man writing in the most beautiful handwriting, and he was writing about حسن الظن بالله. حسن الظن بالله, and just relating. Then there's always on the wall you could see, of course, it's mainly emotions of love, holding on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, حسن الظن بالله, having sabr, just supporting themselves and supporting their friends and whoever is reading. And it was just trying to write on the walls all those feelings that they could not express to anyone, so they would express it on the wall. Be really interesting to just take photos of all that was written on the wall and really make it into what commemorates all those feelings that those that had probably been killed, they could not really express it, but they expressed it on the wall. And a lot of those feelings are really just what was making them embrace all the patience at that moment. It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would have probably lost all the hope. And many of them would tell you, we really had thought that these people that were opening the doors to us were the same as Bashar supporters. But then they discovered that it was really the Mujahideen. They were the ones that were opening the doors to them. And at one point, they really would all say, I knew that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to let this end. Yes, certainly many were killed before they could see the great fatah, before they could see the great victory, but still, at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them their sabr, will give them their reward for the patience that they endured, for all the different torture that they had went through. And عند الله تجتمع الخصوم. And before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would compensate them for all the torture that they had went through. Now, going back to this one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his names and attributes, you would see parts and glimpses of the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created around you. Whether it's the love in the mother that she would give to her child, or whether it's in the care for the father, in the father that he would give his child, or whether it's in the authority in making sure that there's a structure to give the child or the person that they're in authority over. Of course, in this situation, it's the father or the parent to give them structure to get to success. And that's why when you look at لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من ولده ووالده والناس أجمعين, you would not be believers until you would let the Prophet ﷺ, and you would have your center be the Prophet ﷺ more than your children being the center, more than your parents being the center, and more than anyone else in this world, to be the center. You would let who be the center? You would let Allah, you would let the Prophet ﷺ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be your center of focus more than anyone else. Sister Umayyah, you want to say something? Go ahead, Ustazah Umayyah.
Assalamu alaikum. I just catch the meaning of this hadith. I was going to ask you, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أم الله سبحانه وتعالى.
حتى أكون the Prophet ﷺ.
We can't invest it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Well, the reason when we look at حتى أكون, even this isn't a hadith Qudsi, okay? Okay, this isn't a hadith Qudsi. And in fact, Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he heard this, he basically didn't know how to do it. And he had to recognize that he had to work on it. He had something to work on because his children weren't necessarily as secondary focus. His own self wasn't the secondary focus. Wasn't the primary focus, but it was a secondary focus that the Prophet ﷺ wasn't the primary, but he was a secondary. And it wasn't until he worked hard on it, and that's when the Prophet ﷺ, Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it wasn't until that became the primary focus that the Prophet ﷺ tells him, Al-ana ya Umar, now you had become a believer. Once the Prophet ﷺ, once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, once Islam, because you want to look at, well, why the Prophet ﷺ, why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Well, the Prophet ﷺ doesn't take his importance from just his own self. The Prophet ﷺ takes, and all the prophets, they take their position of sanctity because of the fact that they resemble and demonstrate the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why are we saying Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Why are we taking Prophet Ibrahim, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Prophet Nuh, Prophet Musa, etc.? Why are we taking all those prophets as key figures? We take them as key figures because they resemble the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent through them. We take them as the ones that had carried the legacy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent onto the prophets, and that they would demonstrate it on ground. So our love for the prophets is really resembling our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, it's really resembling our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the same thing. So our love to the Prophet ﷺ is resembling our love to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our children, they become secondary because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our primary.
Right.
Our father and our parents, they become secondary. That's why we would say لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. That's why we would say that we do not obey anybody, even if it's our own parents, if it's going to be against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why we would say وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. And your Lord Almighty decreed that you would only worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in terms of relationship with your parents, you would basically give al-ihsan. You would give good conduct. You would give the good and the best of your akhlaq to them. وَالنَّاسِ أَجْمَعِينَ. And all people, whether that's a wife, husband, whatever it is, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your primary. And everyone else becomes secondary. That's what it means to be a believer. Let's look at this one, because this hadith actually explains this one. ثلاث من كن فيه وجد حلاوة الإيمان. أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما، وأن يحب المرء لا يحبه إلا لله، وأن يكره أن يعود في الكفر كما يكره أن يقذف في النار. Let's look at this hadith. It really demonstrates the previous hadith, because let's look at it. The Prophet ﷺ said, 3, if they are to be found in any of you, you would find the sweetness of faith in it. In other words, you would find the sweetness of faith only if these qualities really existed in you. If they're not there, you may have faith, but you really would not find the sweetness of faith. Wait a minute. There's a sweetness of faith and there's faith? Yes, there's a sweetness of faith and there's faith. What's the difference? You can have faith in something, but not necessarily find it as something that you would enjoy. Kind of like this. You can eat a meal because you have to eat because you're hungry. But there are certain meals that you would eat and you enjoy eating it. Yet it's exactly the same thing. There are certain things. Why are you praying? Because I have to pray. Why are you staying away from this haram thing? Well, because it's haram, I'm supposed to stay away from it. But the sweetness of faith is a different level. Why are you praying? Because arihna biha ya Bilal. Because the Prophet ﷺ was telling him, we need to find comfort. Bilal, we're right now feeling distant. We need to feel comfort. So through salah, I'm feeling comfort. How do we let that happen? How do we go from stage of having just faith to a stage where we're actually enjoying wearing hijab? Even though it's hot, yes, I enjoy embracing the principle. I enjoy being within the principle of deen. I enjoy the principle of closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just the idea that I'm close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by doing salah. I'm close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by abstaining and leaving these, let's say, deviant groups. I'm leaving them, but I don't long them anymore. I don't long for this lifestyle anymore because I found sweetness in reading Quran. I found sweetness in joining along with the Salihin. I found peace. I found security. I found that I'm getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by leaving the insecurity of dunya to go into security in akhirah. I'm leaving the hardship in dunya to go into the ease and peace in al-akhirah. I'm leaving the friends that are probably just living in some form of instant gratitude to feeling that I'm getting the gratitude in the long term, which is akhirah. Somebody could be facing some hardship, but still feeling that I'm getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's the believer. Let's say, أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما. When would you find the beauty of Iman? When Allah and His Messenger are more beloved to them than anything else. So what would they do? They would love Allah and His Messenger more than anything. So what does it mean to love Allah and His Messenger more than anything? That they're the most things that you want to get close to. That they're the principle, they're the consideration, they're the primary focus, because you would consider that they're precedent over anything else. So they would recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the area of mercy, is the area of love, is the area of principle, is the area that provides for me. So therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one, since He is the one that provides razaq, then I should be at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's service. Since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Khaliq, then I should be at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's basically submission. Since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gave me life, therefore my life should be to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My life should be living the principle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created my life for. Then what about the Prophet himself? Well, since the Prophet was demonstrating the word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent, then I should basically trace and mimic what that principle actually carries. Then, therefore, for a believer, taking that as أحب إليه مما سواهما, that it would be the primary love, the primary thing that I'm keen in knowing details and learning about. That's what it means to love someone. That's what it means to want to get close to them. When you love someone, you just want to be next to them. When you love someone, you want to mimic them. When you love someone, you really would recognize that without them, you can't live without them. That your life is meaningless without them. So what do you start looking for? You start looking for them. Because to you, they're dear to me. I want them in my life. And وَأَنْ يُحِبَّ الْمَرْءِ, but we would still love people. We would still have some bond with human beings. But this bond is not a materialistic and a mundane bond. It is a bond, لَا يُحِبُّهُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ. When they would love any human being, the reason why they're loving them is just because they demonstrate the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their life. So I love that person, حب في الله, love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why do I love that person? Because she's a good Muslim. Why do I love that person? Because they get me close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because they remind me of my salah. Because they remind me to seek forgiveness for a sin that I might have committed. Because they would correct me when I have these shortcomings and I don't recognize them. And they would tell me those moments that I might have been arrogant in, that, hey, you were too self-centered. You might need to work on your nafs a little bit because you're harming other people. You're not considering this. This is تواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. That's what it means to love a person for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That المؤمنون والمؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض. Believing men and believing women, they are أولياء بعض. What is الولي? الولي is an authority. الولي is also a place of direction. الولي is a place of protection. الولي, a place of authority, a place of direction, a place of protection. And this is key because the relationship of a Muslim brotherhood and sisterhood is all about, well, I would give you some form of authority, even if I might be less ilm, but I would basically be tawasaw bil-haqq wa tawasaw bil-sabr. I would be the person to help one another and help each other to hold on to as-sabr and al-haqq. As-sabr, whether we're speaking about moments, probably lost a loved one, or maybe to hold on to our faith, to remind one another to hold on to the faith, maybe to do an obligation, or maybe to abstain from something that is haram, or perhaps to have sabr in order to get to the highest level of holding on to the principle and having shaja'a. and having the courage, despite the hardship, to have the courage to stay strong and hold on to the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what it means that this Muslim brother or sister, when I love them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're acting as authority. They're also acting as a place of direction to sometimes tell me, hey, you probably need to work on this or that sometimes. And sometimes it's also a place of protection. Maybe I lost a loved one. They're there to help me when I need support, when I need someone to probably cook for me. Maybe I need someone to probably give me an advice, etc., or give you an advice or whatever it is, where, of course, we're all here supposed to be supporting and demonstrating the reason why I'm connecting with this person is because I'm there to give them support. I'm there to give them the help. I'm there to give them the best of what it means to embrace the principle. The best of what it means to embrace the principle. And that's why وَأَنْ يَكْرَهَ أَنْ يَعُودَ فِي الْكُفْرِ, and that they would hate to go back to disbelief as much as they would hate to be thrown in fire. To be thrown in fire. Why an yakrah? I want you to look at this one, because you could see there's a tadad here. There's that antonym, and you could see al-hub and al-kurh. You could see love and hate. You could see that in the same sentence, in the same hadith, you could see that there's halawat al-iman. You could see that they would hate to go in disbelief, and they would have, of course, halawat al-iman, the beauty of faith, etc. You could see that it's giving us this contrast and letting us see that halawat al-iman comes with love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, versus the hate for kufr is basically coming in that you would hate to go for whatever leads to fire, whatever leads to hellfire, whatever leads to being distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now let's go for the other part. There's really a lot to say, but I want to go into a number of different hadith so as inshallah, so as to give us, I guess, a number of different areas. And I would love to hear what you see in those hadith that I probably could not see. Let's look at this hadith. أحب الأعمال إلى الله عز وجل الصلاة على وقتها، ثم بر الوالدين، ثم الجهاد في سبيل الله. أحب الأعمال إلى الله. The most favored actions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is الصلاة على وقتها, is to pray on time. Now, some scholars actually said as-salatu ala waqtiha is to mean to pray at the earliest time for that particular prayer. So let's say dhuhr is at 1 o'clock, you would pray.
Was that Hanafi?
Was that Hanafi to pray at the earliest time? Majority of the scholars, Noura.
Okay.
Said as-salah ala waqtiha is not necessarily within the designated time, meaning let's say dhuhr is from 1 to 4. Majority of the scholars actually considered that no, you're praying at the first maybe 20, 30 minutes of the timing, and not necessarily, yes, I'm praying probably the last half an hour or the last maybe hour for that salah. So as-salat ala, majority actually said it's to pray at the primary time. Let's call it the earliest time for that salah. Except
I noticed a lot of Hanafis are they're very good at being prompt.
Oh, absolutely. There are actually a number of different reasons for the promptness in the Hanafis, I must say. One is I would say the tabligh had actually done an outstanding job in doing that tarbiyah, to be honest. Tabligh, Yes, التبليغ, I think it's fair. You know, every single group, you know, had their, I guess, their contribution within the ummah, but I think التبليغ did a great contribution in making that Sufi tarbiyah. That you would pray in the earliest times, and you would be considerate over certain adab, sharing food, sharing perhaps.
I never knew that group was considered like the Sufi side or whatever.
It is a Sufi side. It is a Sufi
Allah.
side. Oh, definitely. It's a Sufi side. They are really considerate over having some form of tarbiyah, some form of Muslim brotherhood. So they would have a certain, I guess, a large amount of time. They're in the masjid. They're coming in and doing i'tikaf in the masajid. They're eating and sharing foods together. They're doing fasting together. And that's one tarbiyah that you would really only find with the tabligh, to be honest. You would not find this tarbiyah, at least from what I had seen, in any other group in creating this bond. Okay, certainly, you know, maybe a little bit you'll find it in al-Ikhwan, maybe you will find it, but of course, I think at tabligh, I really would like to say that it's fair to see that is that tarbiyah that they really deserve that credit for, to be honest.
Alhamdulillah.
I know
Jazakallah
you're gonna find some other people attacking and ready to attack and say, but they've got the bid'ah and all of that. Every single group has its shortcomings, but let's learn the good from the good. Right? Let's learn the good from the good, and let's be those that build and learn the khair from the others, and not necessarily just work on deconstructing others because of a shortcoming here and there. Don't deconstruct, but learn how to construct. That's what, Allah yarhamu ya Rabbi, my professor Adib Hurani, that's what he would always say when we would say, but this group has bid'ah.
I like that. I like that saying.
Yep, and he would always tell, he was like, yes, they might have their bid'ah, but learn the khayr from them and learn how to construct. Not in many other groups, they see, for example, one group having some bid'ah and they want to deconstruct it and completely, I would say, completely disassemble everything within this group. No, there's
as Muslims, we don't do cancel culture.
Exactly. Don't cancel. Learn the khair from those that have the khair. Learn whatever is good. And this is a bond that is similar to what the Sahaba had. The Sahaba, they would eat together, they would sit together, they would take the time to learn Sirah, they would take the time to learn Hadith, they would repeat it, and they would read Quran together, etc. This is Islam. Don't tell me this is bid'ah. This is what Islam was teaching. Taking the time to do that tarbiyah. Okay, let's continue. As-salatu ala waqtiha. I'm not saying that the Hanafi or the Hanbali or the Shafi'i wasn't saying that as-salatu ala waqtiha is also teaching, or is that it's not teaching that we're supposed to be praying in the earliest times. I'm not saying that at all, but I would say I'm just commenting on who actually has the best tarbiyah that's living right now in our groups, and probably and showing the best demonstration. That's what I was commenting on. But whether it's the Shafi'i or whether it's the Maliki or whether it's the Hanbali, they would all say that this is speaking about the earliest times of it. Okay, ثم بر الوالدين. Then بر الوالدين. Why بر الوالدين? When you're looking at ahabbul a'mal, why am I commenting on ahabbul a'mal when I was talking about brotherhood and sisterhood? When we're talking about ahabbul a'mal, we're talking about the things that you love, things that there's some bond that is basically being built within you. There's a structure. You are basically how you put yourself into a certain structure, into a certain habit. You are basically the habit that you put in structure within yourself. So the Prophet ﷺ was letting us structure our time based on salah, structure our social relationships based on birrul walidain, based on giving the return to those that had contributed the most in our life, which is our parents, and structure our relationship with the community based on al-jihadu fi sabilillah, that you're putting your own life at risk for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to bring about what? إعلاء كلمة الله سبحانه وتعالى. Whether it's to bring in social justice, whether it's to bring in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being in power, or whether it's defending al-masakin, defending those that were in prisons, etc., defending those that were abused, etc. That's basically al-jihad fi sabilillah. So when you're looking at that, أحب الأعمال إلى الله, whether it's the centricity that how you structure your time, how you structure your social relations, how you structure your priorities, your political activism, your priority, your social relations, etc., it's all based on that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you're talking about as-salatu ala waqtiha, that you recognize that how and what makes my priority? Did you pray on time? Is your schedule based on, oh, we got to pray our doer, we got to pray our asr, I got to make sure that I have, let's say, the tools needed for my salah. Not necessarily delay my salah because, oh, I'm at work. Or, well, I don't want to pray in public. But no, for a believer, no, the best of the actions, you are centered around your salah. You're centered around your walidain, your parents. But sometimes my parents can be a pain. Sometimes my parents can be the ones to probably be an obstacle. They would interfere and intervene in every single thing in my life. But you would recognize at least that even if you may disagree with them, that is this necessarily right or wrong, but you would recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered you to please your parents because they're the most ones that when even they give you the order, that they give it to you out of love, out of protection, out of support, out of authority, and therefore at least obey them and at least give them the respect even when you don't want to obey them, because perhaps they're ordering you for something that is wrong. Learn how to reject politely. Learn how to refuse politely when they order you for something haram. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَإِن جَاهَدَكَ عَلَى أَن تُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, well, even if they were to fight you, when they were going to be fighting you, perhaps to associating partners with other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, well, don't obey them in that regards. But صاحبهما في الدنيا معروفة, but be a person that accompanies them on good terms, in good akhlaq. Because at the end, you remember that they had invested in making you who you are today. بر الوالدين. ثم الجهاد في سبيل الله. الجهاد في سبيل الله, your activism. What is it based on? Is your activism within the community, is it based on just getting a job, buying a house, getting a car? Or is your activism based on considering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is my place of activism, the place of where I would invest most of my energy in? even if that meant my own life being at risk, which is in situations of jihad. Jihad is a comprehensive term. It doesn't have to be to die for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It could also mean how much money are you investing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How much of your effort, of your time, of your energy are you putting in for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How much concern is the situation of the ummah to you? Or is your concern that your own problems, perhaps? What's the biggest concern to you? Is it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's al-jihad fi sabilillah. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Mujadila, it said, قُلْ إِن كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ وَإِخْوَانُكُمْ وَأَزْوَاجُكُمْ وَعَشِيرَتُكُمْ وَأَمْوَالٌ اقْتَرَفْتُمُوهَا وَتِجَارَةٌ تَخْشَوْنَ كَسَادَهَا وَمَسَاكِنُ تَرْضَوْنَهَا أَحَبَّ إِلَيْكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَجِهَادٍ فِي سَبِيلِهِ فَتَرَبَّصُوا حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ اللَّهُ بِأَمْرِهِ وَاللَّهُ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الْفَاسِقِينَ. What does the ayah say? And say, if your fathers, your children, your brothers, your wives and your spouses, your tribes, and money that you had, an income that you had basically made, or even a business that you probably fear that, of course, whether it's growing or decreasing, or even homes that you would love or adore, if all of that is more loved to you and lovable to you than Allah and His Messenger, and in jihad and fi sabilillah, and doing jihad for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's cause, fatarabbasu, then just await when the Lord Almighty would decree His order. وَاللَّهُ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الْفَاسِقِينَ. And the Lord Almighty does not give guidance to those that are fasiqeen, that are transgressors. I want you to look at this ayah, because this ayah really demonstrates what these ahadith are saying. If you were to love aba'akum, but wait a minute, do we really love our fathers more than anything, or our children? Because the other ahadith, it was basically saying ahabba ilayhi min waladihi. And this ayah was saying aba'ukum, abna'ukum. And when you look at this one, this is basically looking at what your place of security is. What you would feel your place of security is, you would feel that your place of security is basically your fathers, then your children for the future, then your brothers, basically to give you the support in case something goes wrong, then your spouses. Would you consider your brothers more important to you than your spouses? So for a spouse, you would feel, well, get someone else and we'll move on. وَعَشِيرَتُكُمْ, feel the tribe, the family, that they're basically giving me the support. And also wealth, you would feel that it would be there when I would need it, would give me the authority, would give me whatever is going to give me the support, etc., or even the business, or even the homes, etc. Ahabba. And I want you to look at this one, because with the same concept, that love is to consider what gives you the support, what gives you the protection, what gives you the authority, and what gives you the area of center to you. That's the area of center. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, if your area of what you considered as a place of protection, a place of authority, a place of centricity, was to anyone, even if that was family, or whether that was wealth, or whether that was a position, if you considered that as what you are living for and what you want to invest your wealth, your time, your energy for, then fatarabbasu. What is التربص? التربص is to look and seek something. But this isn't to look and search for anything. This is actually a threat. That it's not going to be an instant retaliation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's going to be an awaited, and it's going to be a long-term thing that perhaps in the long while you may not recognize, but something will be coming at your way. What is it? It's when these things will either get into a decrease, or they will not be at the support that you had expected, or they would basically disappoint you. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, حتى يأتي الله بأمره. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you're looking, whoever would seek izzah, support or power in other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, جعل الله ذله على يديه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let a dhul, their humiliation, be through them. Why? Because they had actually thought that that was the area of power. But there's no izzah but through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاللَّهُ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الْفَاسِقِينَ. And the Lord Almighty does not guide al-qawm al-fasiqeen. Why al-fasiq? Why is that even considered fisq? What is fisq? Il-fisq, remember when we talked about not having the peel? Because the peel is supposed to be what protects the fruit or the vegetable. And that's the same thing. So if the person had thought that that was the area of protection, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that you would not actually find the protection and the guidance to getting such protection, because the true protection is actually supposed to be coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the ultimate protection. Any other area, in thinking that that area is going to give you protection, you're living a mirage. You're living in some kind of a self-manipulation. Does that mean I'm supposed to consider that my father and mother are never going to give me the support that I need? No, I'm not saying that. We're not saying that your mother and father are not going to give you the support that you will need, but we're actually talking about in situations where the person is willing to risk their faith for whether it's their fathers, their children, their money, their whatever it is. If you're willing to risk your faith for any of these, that's when that person would be a fasiq. But if these areas, whether it's your father, your children, your money, is all supposed to be coming in to help you get the support for akhirah, then that's actually good. That's not fisq. The reason why I'm getting a job is to keep me stay within the halal boundaries, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to take care of my children, to take care of my responsibilities. That's why I'm making this money. I'm making this money not for the sake of dunya, but for the sake of akhirah. I'm basically focused on my spouse, not because I'm basically just living a romantic relationship. I'm basically concerned because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered me to take care of my spouse. I'm ordered to take care of my family, my parents, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered me. That's not fisq. When we understand different things, that they could be just one fine line between shaja'a, courage, and being a coward, or at-tahawwur, or probably getting into some form of maybe arrogance. It's a fine line between arrogance and courage, a fine line between money wandering and spending money for hospitality, a fine line. Fine line between a lot of these akhlaq. So recognizing that if I'm basically here trying to do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's not fisq. But it would be fisq if it was at the expense of my love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then it would be that this is an area of fisq. This is an area of self-manipulation. This is an area of misguidance. Let's look at this hadith. Mu'adh bin Jabal had said, أخذ بيده يوما ثم قال يا معاذ والله إني لأحبك يا سلام. فقال له معاذ بأبي أنت وأمي يا رسول الله وأنا والله أحبك. قال أوصيك يا معاذ لا تدعن في دبر كل صلاة أن تقول اللهم أعني على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. يا سلام. Let's look at this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ held on to Mu'adh ibn Jabal's hand. How old was Mu'adh ibn Jabal? So Mu'adh ibn Jabal at the time was around 18, 19 years old. Okay, so just a young man. The Prophet ﷺ holds his hand. I want you to see this one. The Prophet ﷺ holds whose hand? Holds Mu'adh ibn Jabal's hand. And he says, Mu'adh, I love you. What kind of love is this? He loves him. Why? Because of the qualities that he has. And let's see, Mu'adh said, بِأَبِي أَنْتَ وَأُمِّي رَسُولَ اللَّهِ وَأَنَا وَاللَّهِ أُحِبُّكَ. And by who I would sacrifice my own father and mother, I also love you. What kind of love? This love is that I am willing to give the protection, willing to support, willing to pledge for the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ said, O Mu'adh, I want to give you a will. أوصيك يا معاذ لا تدعن في دبر كل صلاة أن تقول. O Mu'adh, after every time you would pray, don't leave this dua. Every salah, after every salah, say the following. اللهم أعني على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. Ya Allah, give me the ability to remember you, to thank you, and to worship you in the best manner. I want you to look at this one. There are so many things that I see in this hadith. Holding the hand, showing some personal connection. He didn't just say, أحبك. He didn't just say, I love you. But he said, he holds his hand, and with this body, it's like holding his hand is, bring attention. I love you. But the Prophet ﷺ said, but there's one thing. In order for you to stay in relationship, so you could stay accompany me in Jannah, there's one thing that you have to do. Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrik. Ya Allah, a'inni ala dhikrik. Ya Allah, you can perhaps do a dhikr, but you can probably find it so tough on you and feel that you're too lazy to do dhikr, too lazy to take the time to learn the deen, too lazy to memorize Quran, too lazy to read Quran, too lazy to do dhikr, to do tasbih, too lazy to get up for salah. So you would say, Ya Allah, a'anni ala dhikrik. Ya Allah, give me the power, the energy to do dhikr. I don't want to feel lazy doing it. أعني على ذكرك وشكرك, and to be thankful. Why is shukr? Because many times we can have the provisions But then we would forget to be thankful. So we would say, it's kind of like saying, أعني على شكرك. Make me not be lazy to thank you, Ya Allah. You can see and you can probably have the different provisions, but you want al-i'ana. Al-i'ana is to get the support, to not be lazy, to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وحسن عبادتك. What is الحسن العبادة? حسن العبادة, the word حسن actually means perfection. العبادة means worship. How do I perfect my worship? Number one is that it is done based on the sunnah. I'm not making any bid'ah. Number two is that it demonstrates sincerity. That's حسن العبادة. I'm doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. حسن العبادة is that it would be done as the Prophet ﷺ had done it. That's the حسن العبادة. When you look at this, اللهم أعني على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. Take the time, if you truly love someone, number one, learning from this hadith, you truly love someone, take the time to also build a relationship. Sometimes you could see asking about the person. How is your mother doing? How are your kids doing? How is your husband doing? Your wife, whatever it is. Of course, taking consideration certain cultural, structure in how you ask the question. But asking about the person to show that you care is something that we would see also in the hadith of Jabir ibn Abdullah had narrated. The Prophet ﷺ asks him why he was in a rush. He said, well, I recently got married. And he asks him, is she virgin or not virgin? In other words, is she a divorcee? What was a different relationship here? Of course, in our society, you can't ask such a question. That's a personal question. But you could see that knowing certain details, it was to help the person feel that I am here sharing certain details, but be careful with the amount of information that you would share about yourself. Because
and another thing was like when some of the companions were like absent, he would ask about them too, right?
there is a hadith we're going to get to, inshallah. A Sahabi, he dies, or at least his son dies. We're going to get to that in just a bit. That Sahabi, his son dies, and the Prophet ﷺ missed him and said, where did he go? And we're going to come across that hadith and asking about the person when they're not at sight anymore. Where did they go? What happened to them? Why are they absent? And knowing details about them sometimes is to show the person that you care. Same thing when he asked about Thabit ibn Qais. Where did he go? Turns out that Thabit ibn Qais was afraid when the ayah was revealed. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي ولا تجهروا له بالقول كجهر بعضكم لبعض أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون. He basically thought because that ayah was revealed and telling them that they should not raise their voices beyond the Prophet ﷺ's voice, and that ayah in Surah al-Hujurat, Thabit ibn Qais thought that ayah was referring to him. He said, that's it, I'm doomed. This ayah is referring to me. I'm going to get to hellfire. That's it. Isn't until the Prophet ﷺ. Of course, Thabit ibn Qais had an issue with his loud voice. Maybe he had a hearing problem. Who knows what the problem was, but he had a very loud voice. And he thought that ayah was referring to him. So he stayed in his home. The Prophet ﷺ, where's Thabit? And at the end, they told him that Thabit actually was afraid and wanted to stay at his home because he was afraid that this ayah was referring to him. And that's when the Prophet ﷺ said, tell him that ثابت ثابت في الجنة. ثابت, the word ثابت means steadfast. So the Prophet ﷺ said, ثابت is steadfast in Jannah. Same thing when we look at another hadith. The Prophet ﷺ asks about Julaybib. Julaybib, he was the ugly Sahabi. He was so ugly that when he asked him, Julaybib, aren't you going to get married? And Julaybib, looking at him, was like, who would get me married? I'm too ugly for this. But the Prophet ﷺ asked him again, Julaybib, aren't you going to get married? But then Julaybib said, no one would get me married. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, well, I'll get you married. Then Julaybib, the Prophet ﷺ proposes for on his behalf. But the man didn't know. So the Prophet ﷺ goes to a man and he says, I'm proposing for your daughter. And in Lugha Arabiya, you can have somebody kind of like a chaperone or somebody act on your behalf. So the man thinks that he was proposing for himself. So the man, he says, oh, this is a great pleasure. But the Prophet ﷺ tells him, well, it's not for me. It's actually for Julaybib. So Julaybib, instantly, he remembers that, oh, it's that ugly man. And he says, I'll ask her mom. It's like, okay, he goes and he talks to her, to his wife, and he says, the Prophet ﷺ is proposing for a daughter. And she just instantly said, oh, what a great pleasure. Well, this is, a sharaf. This is an honor. But then he said, no, it's actually for Julaybib. That's when she basically just responded that this is such a disgusting person. She was disgusted to even think of the idea. But the girl overhears this and she said, the Prophet ﷺ is endorsing him. Get me married to him. Just by the Prophet ﷺ proposing on his behalf, that's an endorsement. Julaybib then goes and basically gets married to the girl. The girl gets married the second day the call for jihad is announced. Julaybib, this is the second day of his wedding, Julaybib rushes to participate in jihad. Now his life is at stake. Then, after the war, the Prophet ﷺ tells the Sahaba, who's missing? They're looking for X person, Y person, the list goes on and on. And then he said, but I'm missing somebody. Who are you missing? I'm missing Julaybib. No one recognized that he was missing, but the Prophet ﷺ recognized that he is missing. You normally don't recognize someone that's not very famous, but the Prophet ﷺ recognizes that Julaybib, no, he had what other people don't have, the quality of al-Iman. So the Prophet ﷺ sends off a number of Sahabas to search for Julaybib. They go and they found Julaybib killed in the midst of 11 different kuffar. And then, of course, it seems that he was basically, I guess, surrounded by 11. He did his job and he fought all of them. And finally, he got killed himself. That's when the Prophet ﷺ carries Julaybib and he basically puts his own garment on him. And he says, Julaybibu minni wa ana min. Julaybib is from me and I'm from Julaybib. Julaybib belongs to me. Even when everyone had regarded that Julaybib is not amongst them because of his appearance, Julaybib is part of me. Julaybib has a different position. Julaybib is basically to be honored by the Prophet ﷺ himself, asking and searching for the Salihin and asking about what happened to them. Are they okay? Are they needing in any way, in any support, whether that is maybe physical help, maybe food, maybe a kind word, a kind gesture. What is it that we can help this person in? That's what it means to have the Muslim brotherhood and the sisterhood. And of course, when we're looking at sometimes, even if it means visiting that person, let's look at this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, this hadith narrated by Abu Huraira, you could see it's narrated in Sahih Muslim. أن رجلا زار أخا له في قرية أخرى فأرصد الله على مدرجته ملكا فلما أتى عليه قال أين تريد؟ قال أريد أخا لي في هذه القرية. قال هل لك عليه من نعمة تربها؟ قال لا، غير أني أحبه في الله. قال فإني رسول الله إليك، إن الله قد أحبك كما أحببته فيه. يا سلام. Let's see. This hadith, what happened? A man went off to visit another brother, and this is akhan lahu, is not a biological brother, but a brother based on the bond of la ilaha illallah, in another village. And then أرسل الله على مدرجته ملكا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let an angel sit on the path that he's taking in order to go to this man. And then once this man got to the angel, then the angel certainly was in a form of a human being. He said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I'm visiting a friend of mine in that village." He said, "Is there any interest that or favor that you're seeking from him?" He said, "No, I just love him for the sake of Allah." He said, "That is the angel that's coming in the form of human being." He said, "Well, I'm the messenger of your Lord Almighty, coming to tell you that your Lord loved you as you had loved him." Ya salam. Ya salam. This is an angel. It's like, "I'm the messenger of your Lord, coming to tell you that your Lord loves you as you had loved that friend." And there's no bigger bond. Let's see the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih Muslim as well. أوثق عرى الإيمان الحب في الله والبغض في الله. What is أوثق عرى? العروة is really, that when, I don't know what it's called in English, but it's basically, what does it say? No, that's not necessarily an accurate translation, but let me explain what al-urwa is. When you have a garment, let's say a garment that has a button, there's the button, and the button is supposed to go inside this hole, of course, in order to fasten it. Okay, so fastening that area, it's like you've got an iman. The iman is like a garment. It's like a garment, and in order to let it completely fasten around you, just like a button and the hole inside of it, is in order to fasten that faith around you, it's really the love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the hate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Love and hate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what's going to let that bond of iman really surround you in that comfort, in that security. You're fastening that faith around you by really the relationship that you would make with people, that it's the relationship based on love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and hate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wait a minute, we talked about love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does it mean to hate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That H word, right? What does it mean to hate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In the same way, when you love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reason why I love that person is because they're good Muslims, is because they're always going to the masjid. I go with them to the masjid. I go with them for the hifadh. I go with them because they're good in their akhlaq. They're good in their words. They're always reminding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. الكره في الله or البغض في الله, the reason why I'm distancing myself from that person and why I hate being around them is because they're always doing something haram. They're speaking of haram things. They're speaking or they're doing haram things, or they're probably showing me something that is not appropriate, or they're probably entertaining me in something haram, etc., or they're probably not reminding me of the time for salat. In other words, at the end is that this person is living for the dunya. So therefore, I would hate being around them because they don't connect me to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I would distance myself away from them. Let's say, well, what is the outcome for all of this? عن أبي هريرة قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله تعالى يقول يوم القيامة أين المتحابون بجلالي اليوم أظلهم في ظل يوم لا ظل إلا ظلي. All the hadith are so beautiful. I mean, all the hadith are beautiful, but okay, let's see. On Judgment Day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say and call out on Judgment Day, أين المتحابون بجلالي? Where are those that are loving each other بجلالي, in my glory? What does it mean to love in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's jalal? So to love in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's jalal, the reason why we're connecting with one another is really because of a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is because we're considering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's honor is what holds our bond together. They would love one another because they honor Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. اليوم أظلهم في ظلي. Today, I will أظلهم. I will shed my shade upon them when there's no shade but my shade, which is the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's look at this one. That's the hadith that I wanted to get to, Noura. A man, أن رجلا كان يأتي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ومعه ابن له فقال له النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أتحبه؟ قال نعم يا رسول الله أحبك الله كما أحبه. ففقده النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال ما فعل فلان ابن فلان؟ قالوا يا رسول الله مات. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لأبيه ألا تحب أن تأتي بابا من أبواب الجنة إلا وجدته ينتظرك؟ فقال رجل يا رسول الله أله خاصة أم لكلنا؟ قال بل لكلكم. Let's look at this hadith. A man, there is another narration that gives more details about this hadith. A man comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and every time he would come, he would come basically with his son. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, do you love him? And he said, oh yes, Prophet of Allah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala love you as much as I love him. So one day, the Prophet ﷺ, there is another narration that every time he would come with his son to the halaqah, his son would be playing behind his back, and then he would get him and set him on his lap. So he was truly in true love with his son. So one day the Prophet ﷺ missed this man, and he said, what happened to that person? And they said, well, his son died. And the Prophet ﷺ basically tells his father, would you not want to? So it seems like he called him, he met him, he, finds him somewhere, probably goes to him. And he said, would you not want to come to a door where for every door of Jannah, you would find him there waiting for you. And he said, another man is hearing all of this. Like, he's sitting down and, listening to all of this. Another man, while the Prophet ﷺ was telling him, would you not want to be, for every single door you would knock at in Jannah, your son would be waiting for you at the door? And he said, yes. But another man was hearing all of this. And he said, oh, Prophet of Allah, is that exclusive to him? Or are we also included in this? And he said, no, it's بَلْ لِكُلِّكُمْ. All of you are included in this. Meaning, if you lost a loved one, whether it's your son, your husband, you lost someone, but then you basically love them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you really take the time to be patient, then inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you love them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you make it to Jannah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically make that son, specifically son or daughter, that you might have lost, they'd be waiting for you in Jannah to open the door for Jannah for you. And the Prophet ﷺ, remember our favorite hadith, Allahumma inni as'aluka fi'al al-khayrat. And وترك المنكرات وحب المساكين وإذا أردت بعبادك فتنة فاقبضني إليك غير مفتون. وإذا أردت بعبادك فتنة فاقبضني إليك غير مفتون. To say, O Lord Almighty, I ask you for the ability to do good deeds, to avoid bad deeds, to love the poor, and if you desire a trial for your servants, take me to you without being tested. And certainly, all the hadith that we had said, they're right there translated, alhamdulillah. How do I relate with my Muslim brother or sister? Al-Muslimu akhul Muslim, la yadlimuhu, wa la yakhdiluhu, wa la yahqiruhu. A Muslim brother. A Muslim is a brother to the other Muslim. They do not oppress him. He does not oppress his Muslim brother, nor forsake him, nor look down upon him. In other words, does not consider that somehow they are better than them. And I want to focus on this one because, it's the most thing that lets anybody see and live in somehow feeling that they're superior to another person is discrimination. When you would think that somehow you're superior and therefore give yourself the justification to perhaps abuse the person or turn them down or even mock the person and make them feel that they are somehow less than you. And this is extremely important. Why? How do I do this? The Prophet ﷺ, al-mu'minu akhul mu'min. A believer is a brother to the other believer. فَلَا يَحِلُّ لِلْمُؤْمِنِ أَنْ يَبْتَاعَ عَلَى بَيْعِ أَخِيهِ وَلَا يَخْطِبُ عَلَى خِطْبَةِ أَخِيهِ حَتَّى يَذَرَ. Let's look at the hadith. A believer is a brethren to another believer. And therefore, it is not permissible for one to buy on the sale of his brother. In other words, if you know that that person is interested in that, don't consider yourself that you have the right to take it over. You have to understand, respecting people's boundaries is part of Islam. And same thing, لا يخطب على خطبة أخيه. If one is to probably maybe propose to a girl, you know she's already proposed to that person, and right now you're like, hey, I have better qualities. After all, I've got a better job. I've got a better degree and all of that, and therefore I should butt in and propose to her. If you know she's already proposed to someone else, I'm not here talking about having multiple proposals. That's permissible. What does it mean to have multiple proposals? Let's say X proposes to Y, and then we've got 5 guys coming to propose for this girl. Okay, that's permissible until they give them a word. Then she's considered like a fiance. They give them a word. This family, yes, that's it. We're going to basically get you both married and finalize everything. We still don't have a marriage contract. This is just a proposal. Okay, then in that situation, it would be impermissible to come in and propose to the girl if you already know that she was already engaged to someone else. Why? Because المسلمون تتكافأ دماؤهم يسعى بذمتهم أدناهم ويجير عليهم أقصاهم وهم يد على من سواهم. Why? Because the blood of Muslims are equal. What does it mean that the blood of Muslims are equal? This is not talking about the type of blood, but this is actually talking about their life is equal. You don't consider yourself as in any way as somehow better than another Muslim brother. And their lowest member. Well, why is it their lowest member? Because the society basically has probably some certain structure. Maybe that, yes, this person is a doctor, maybe taking a certain privilege. Probably the privilege is allowing him to perhaps take a certain maybe social acceptance, socially get some form of authority because maybe their degree is giving them some form of authority. Maybe their money is giving them a certain social authority, etc. All of that may be within the society, but not because someone has some privilege, it doesn't mean that they would abuse that privilege and disrespect someone that probably at the other side of privilege. Maybe doesn't have a degree, maybe uneducated, maybe doesn't have the money, maybe doesn't have perhaps the maybe the group that they're coming from, and probably the family name or whatever it is. But at the end, the farthest among them grants protection. In other words, when it comes to having the privilege, whether the person is seen by the society as not having the same privilege, but at the end, within the Muslim community, وَهُمْ يَدٍ عَلَى مَنْ سُوَاهُمْ, you're supposed to support one another against those that are attacking them, against those that are trying to create disunity within the society. So this is it, inshallah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those that would love one another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make us from those that would be called on Judgment Day. أين المتحابون بجلالي? Where are those that love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So, inshallah, we'll gather together for more, inshallah. I'd love to hear what you would like to share, what you probably had learned in those ahadith that I probably couldn't mention, or maybe it didn't even occur to me and occurred to you. Give me some of what you were inspired with and inspire us with it, please. I'd love to hear it. I'm sure all of you have something to say.
Yes, Bismillah.
Go ahead, Ustaza Umayya.
Bismillah. Many things, uncountable things to say, but I don't know where I can start.
We're listening.
This hadith, I thought that only on tafsir you sublimize our soul, but I found, subhanallah, even when explain about this hadith, it's not same we usually know it or study it. It's in different way. Yani this feed the spirit too much, and it's very, 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 very. May Allah grant us this knowledge. Ya Rabbi, Rabbi zidni ilma.
آمين يا ربي. ربي يحفظك يا ربي ويرضى عنك يا ربي. Tell us what you had seen in those ahadith and inspire us, dear.
Yeah, I saw Allah.
يا ربي.
I saw Allah.
يا
It
رب.
hit me. It touched my heart. No word can explain what I'm feeling, but usually, because sometimes the language not help me, and sometimes when I review the class again or hear it again and again, next time it comes more influence, more reflections.
الله يحفظك يا ربي وربي يرضى عنك يا ربي. أن الله سبحانه وتعالى يا ربي يحلل عقدة من لساننا جميعا.
يا ربي يا
الله
رب.
سبحانه وتعالى يا ربي give us the words to articulate the words in the ilm and the inspiration to articulate, to see, and even to hold on to the words of dhikr يا ربي. اللهم آمين يا ربي.
دين روعة، دين روعة، روعة
الحمد لله.
الدين. الحمد لله. جزاك الله خيرا.
وإياكم. الله يحفظك يا ربي. Anybody else wants to share anything? Samira is here. How are you, dear?
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
Walaikum
وبركاته.
salam. Long time no see.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I've been out and unable to attend.